boundaries were, but it wasn't until my mom passed away, we didn't have boundaries with each other. We were very enmeshed, we were very connected, and it wasn't always a good thing because she was very demonstrative in how she thought I should do certain things, and I didn't know how to set a boundary that was loving with her. I just shut her out. And for me, I didn't understand the difference between walls and boundaries. And so this has to do with that secret keeping. And that as I've grown, I have really released myself from being the person that wanted private secret friendships because it carried a lot of weight that wasn't always good. It wasn't always um, comfortable. And when I was very transparent with people that I had had very, not necessarily sexually intimate relationships with that were private, but friendships where they were, nobody else knew about them. And it was just like this one and one association. And it was like, oh, don't tell such and such that I'm friends with you. And I got to a place in my life where it didn't serve me and in fact enraged me, and I no longer accepted that level of friendship on that secret format of that scorpionic frequency that is very secretive. It's very intimate, it's very secretive.
Mm.
I'm intimate in with the people that I want to be intimate with in that engagement. Um, but I no longer am open to people just dumping their secrets on me and asking me to hold them. And
Mm.
it's a boundaries thing. And I have to tell you, the biggest lesson for that is how liberating it was when I was able to identify and live that, activate that boundary.
This is interesting what you say about boundaries. When I think about Scorpio, even when you use that word weight, so with horse jockeys, I was doing a little bit of digging, and it seems like there's a very specific weight that people have to keep in order to be able to perform, I suppose.
Yes,
Um,
so you have to weigh in. So
mhm.
each horse race, say that there are 9 races on a card for the day at the horse races. Between each race, you have to weigh in your weight because you would need to make weight for horses that are being handicapped in the racing form, because it's a handicapping. And so they have to know that there's an accountability of weight. And if not, then you're kind of penalized with a pound or two that the odds will drop on the racehorse if you don't make weight, right? So that's the game.
So I
And
was actually quite interested in this because when I think about Scorpio,
mhm,
um, I think about the extremities, like even a Scorp rising, like it's that, generally someone's going to be very, let's say, very tall or is something very extreme or very petite. And so with you being a horse jockey, my assumption is that you're petite. I've never actually seen you in face to face,
I'm
but
kind of I'm kind of tall for a jockey. I'm petite in uh I'm not petite in that I'm fairy or waif-like. I'm pretty sturdy. I'm very curvy in stature now. And even then, I was 5'6" as a jockey, which is tall. So if you're riding at an average of 111 to 118 pounds, fully clothed with helmet and equipment, you have to be very slight in weight, which for me was underweight, and for almost 95% of the jockey colony, they all have to really monitor weight, and it ends up in eating disorders or kidney failure for some, using diuretics to waste water, um, and either being anorexic or bulimic to maintain weight. You can't fully hydrate on a hot day of races in between each race because water weighs weight, right? So you're always thirsty, you're always a little bit cranky. Um, there are some people that live that easier than others. But I was not in a very happy state when I had to starve myself and not fully hydrate. You don't feel well. If it's 108 degrees outside and you're, you know, putting out a lot of physical effort to get a horse across a finish line and you're underhydrated, you don't feel well physically. I mean, yes, is it part of the unfortunately, it's part of how it works to make that weight you if you wanna ride horses. Hopefully that will change in some capacity. I don't know how, but it's a very unhealthy way mentally, physically, and emotionally to have to live your life.
So then, during this time when horses were still everything that you thought about,
Yeah.
um, did you take any sort of support from, I guess, the horses that you got to be with? Was there like an intuitive connection between you and the horses?
For many, I think my big disappointment with horse racing was is that it wasn't when I once I got into the industry, it really wasn't an industry that loved horses. It was it was to make money. And I was blindsided by that part of the business until I really got into it and saw how it wasn't an industry that truly loved horses for being horses. It was a money-making factory, and I started to get very disillusioned and jaded by that because my first priority was the welfare and the happiness and connection with horses.
Huh. Um,
So,
mm,
does that does that answer part of that?
no, it does. It does. Um, did you experience any significant experiences or stories with horse racing that you can tie strikingly to that 12th house Scorpio stellium?
I think the secrets. I think that what we just discussed about keeping secrets, there are a lot of illegal maneuverings that go on within the industry. There are a lot of uh, affairs that happen. There's a lot of underhanded, dark things. I've always kind of said horse racing's a bit of a bipolar business because you have the wealth and the owners on the front side of the racetrack enjoying, being fully dressed and enjoying the celebratory aspect of the industry and a lot of money. And on the backside of the racetrack, it's its own society where people are addicted to the highs and the lows of the industry. So it's very kind of bipolar in the extremity of winning the races, betting on the races. Um, there's a lot of consumption of alcohol and drugs, and it's it's a little bit of a polarity to the front side of the glamour of what horse racing looks like in the news.
What's your ideal moment, your ideal event being with horses? So
With
it's
horses and now it's very different than it ever was. For me, I grew up being very competitive very early on, and w it offered me a container to learn sportsmanship and integrity and camaraderie. Mm, my Scorpio nature was inhibited my competitive edge because I self-sacrificed and I turned all of the failure in on myself, and it became an unhappy place for me to be that competitive. Learning for me with horses to be competitive and be happy was a lifetime pursuit, to not take it so seriously that I didn't feel the responsibility of the failure. And that I think is very scorpionic.
mm,
And so the ideal for me now is to not compete with horses at all. For me, my ideal is riding horses out on a trail ride with nature in the least constraint possible where everybody's enjoying, and that it's not so much a competitive, conquering, controlling environment. I mean, yes, do you have to be safe with horses? Absolutely. And without the experience of learning how to control them in the capacity that I grew up with, which was about power, control, and intimidation, yeah. But at a certain point, yes, I understood that's how it needed to be implemented for my safety, but it wasn't about domination for me, it was about connection. And a lot of how I moved through the world in the competitive industry was about domination and not connection. And for me, it's now purely about connection. I don't want anything that has to do with dominating an animal in any capacity.
That's such a Scorp-like thing. Well, that's what I kind of think of. In some like domination,
Power
control,
and control.
power.
Yeah, power and control.
So
And
it's very
and
incredible to see that kind of flip of someone who, was very much in that sort of space, but how now has switched into connection. So if you could share about that and maybe where intuition comes into all of that.
intuition comes to the place of letting go of any of the power and control,
Mhm.
um, and allowing them to communicate with me. Being open, not allowing the animal to communicate with me, but me creating the space and the openness to receive the communication in its purest form from a horse or a dog or a cat, which I do perceive and communicate with. But it truly wasn't a pure frequency for me, or a more continual frequency, until I wasn't trying to dominate or control an animal in that capacity.
Mhm.
So, and that's all shifted in the last 10 years for me. I The horse industry for me was very much about my conditioning, and collectively what was being done in the horse industry at the time and what was contemporary with those training techniques. There are multiple incredible horsemen and women out there today training horses through connection instead of domination. And that I wholeheartedly support. It's just that for me, it doesn't, that's not where my growth is any longer, through the connection with horses. I enjoy them through the connection of the horses that I'm involved with, which, I have one client left that I've worked with for 12 years, and I know her horses very well, and they are my responsibility for as long as they're alive, and I honor that, and it keeps me connected to the horses that I can enjoy and I trust, because I know what went into working with those animals for the last 12 years. And I know it's my work, and I trust that, and I value that, and I enjoy that, and I love them all the more for that connection that that's created. And so that's the purest essence that I enjoy now. And I think that's what I wholeheartedly and intuitively wanted my entire life, but through the container of the competitive and dominance, I couldn't truly uh feel that. It's not that I didn't have wonderful relationships at the racetrack or with horses that I've worked with through the years. I absolutely did and connected, but it wasn't until the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years where I didn't have any interest in controlling them in any capacity, where I have open communication with them. We have dialogues that are different than I ever experienced before. And that's that intuitive. that's that intuitive connection. And it's an allowance. It's an allowance of me being open to that perception and not feel crazy, right? So another one of the catalysts in that Scorpio stellium is that the modality of it is fixed in nature, which makes the stance very firm, and change is not particularly easy for that fixed modality. So Aquarius, Scorpio, Leo, and Taurus are all very fixed in nature, and they're they're not mutable like Pisces is, that is flexible and adaptable and go with the flow. They're not. They're very firm in their stance. And it can create a lot of perseverance on the bright side, and on the shadow side it can create a lot of will and stubbornness and unwillingness to change anything. And I definitely have experienced that in my life.